Tonight, we begin with a collision between three great civilizations: Christian Europe, Islamic Middle East, and Byzantine Empire. That changed the world forever. The Crusades weren't just about Jerusalem. They were about trade routes, cultural exchange, technological transfer, and the birth of a modern warfare. Relax by the fire and discover how religious war accidentally created the Renaissance, connected East and West, and taught Europe everything it needed to conquer the world. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Tonight, you're safe, warm, and about to witness the most consequential religious conflict in human history. Let your mind drift back through time, past modern global conflicts, past colonial empires, past the age of exploration, all the way back to a moment when three worlds collided and changed the course of civilization forever. November 27th, 1095. The Cathedral of Clermont rises against the grey French sky like a monument to medieval certainty. Its stone walls echoing with the footsteps of nobles, clergy, and common pilgrims who have travelled from across Europe to hear Pope Urban II deliver what will become the most consequential sermon in Christian history. Inside the packed cathedral, the air thrums with expectation. Something momentous is about to happen. Everyone can feel it. The Pope, a man of aristocratic bearing and calculating intelligence, steps forward to address a crowd that represents the full spectrum of medieval European society. Mighty barons who rule vast estates, ambitious knights seeking glory and land, merchants dreaming of Eastern riches, and countless peasants desperate for salvation and escape from grinding poverty. Urban begins with words that seem routine: a call for church reform, complaints about clerical corruption, appeals for Christian unity. But then his voice rises, and he speaks words that will echo across 2 centuries of bloodshed. A grave report has come from the lands around Constantinople. The Muslims have invaded Christian territory and are torturing, killing, and destroying the churches of God. Jerusalem, the holy city where Christ walked, where he died for our sins, where he rose again. Jerusalem cries out for deliverance. The cathedral erupts. Deus vult, the crowd roars. God wills it. But these aren't just words of religious enthusiasm. They're the birth cry of a new kind of warfare, one that will transform 3 civilizations and reshape the medieval world in ways that Urban himself cannot possibly imagine. What Urban is proposing isn't just another military campaign. He's calling for something unprecedented, a holy war in which killing becomes an act of devotion, conquest becomes pilgrimage, and earthly violence transforms into spiritual salvation. He promises that any Christian who dies fighting for Jerusalem will have all sins forgiven and will ascend directly to paradise. It's an offer that medieval Christians, terrified of hell and desperate for salvation, find irresistible. But Urban's call isn't purely spiritual. Hidden beneath the religious rhetoric are powerful political and economic motivations that will drive European expansion for the next 5 centuries. The Byzantine Empire, Christianity's eastern outpost, is under pressure from expanding Muslim powers and has appealed to the West for military assistance. Italian maritime cities like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa see opportunities for profitable trade with the East. European nobles glimpse chances to acquire new lands and wealth beyond anything available in their overcrowded homelands. Most significantly, Urban recognizes that launching European military energy toward external conquest might solve growing internal problems. Medieval Europe is plagued by constant warfare between competing nobles, endemic violence that weakens Christian society and threatens church authority. By redirecting this violence toward external enemies, Urban hopes to achieve both spiritual and practical goals, defending Christianity while pacifying Europe. As the crowd disperses from Clermont, carrying Urban's message to every corner of the Christian world, Few understand that they've just witnessed the beginning of a cultural revolution. The Crusades will do more than capture or lose territory. They'll create new institutions, spread new technologies, establish new trade relationships, and introduce Europeans to ideas, goods, and knowledge that will ultimately transform medieval civilization into something recognizably modern. The knights who take the cross at Clermont think they're embarking on a holy war to reclaim sacred territory. They don't realize they're actually beginning Europe's first systematic encounter with advanced Islamic civilization, an encounter that will teach them mathematics, medicine, philosophy, engineering, and commercial techniques that will make possible the Renaissance, the age of exploration, and eventually European global dominance. Within months, armies will begin marching toward Constantinople, carrying not just weapons and supplies, but the seeds of transformation that will change 3 civilizations forever. The medieval world of isolated regions, limited trade, and rigid social boundaries is about to encounter the Islamic world of international commerce, scientific innovation, and cultural sophistication. The collision will be violent, tragic, and ultimately revolutionary. Spring 1096. Across Europe, a phenomenon without precedent in Christian history is unfolding as hundreds of thousands of people abandon their homes, families, and livelihoods to march toward Jerusalem. This isn't just an army, it's a migration, a social revolution, a religious movement that's pulling apart the carefully ordered structure of medieval society and reshaping it into something entirely new. In the countryside outside Cologne, Peter the Hermit addresses a crowd of peasants with wild eyes and wilder promises. A charismatic preacher whose unkempt appearance and passionate oratory have earned him a reputation for holiness. Peter has spent months travelling through France and Germany, transforming Urban's call for a noble military expedition into a popular crusade that attracts the poorest and most desperate members of medieval society. Peter's audience isn't composed of knights trained for warfare or nobles equipped for long military campaigns. These are serfs fleeing feudal obligations, debtors escaping creditors, criminals seeking redemption, and countless families for whom the promise of spiritual salvation and earthly prosperity in the East offers the only hope of escaping grinding poverty. They believe that Jerusalem flows with milk and honey, that the roads are paved with gold, that simply reaching the holy city will transform their lives both spiritually and materially. The People's Crusade, as historians will later call Peter's movement, represents something unprecedented: mass, popular participation in international warfare. Never before have common people organised themselves for military action across such distances. Never before have religious enthusiasm and economic desperation combined to motivate such massive social movement. But the People's Crusade also reveals the darker impulses that Urban's call has unleashed. As Peter's followers march east through the Rhineland, they encounter Jewish communities that have lived peacefully alongside Christian neighbours for generations. Inflamed by preachers who argue that Crusaders should fight enemies of Christ at home before travelling to fight them abroad, the crowds turn violent. In Speyer, Worms, Mainz, and dozens of other cities, Jewish communities are attacked, their synagogues burned, their members killed or forced to convert. The violence is unprecedented in scale and brutality, representing the first systematic persecution of European Jews and establishing patterns of religious intolerance that will plague European civilization for centuries. Meanwhile, the official crusade, organized by Europe's military nobility, is assembling with different but equally transformative effects. Godfrey of Bouillon sells his entire inheritance to finance his expedition. Raymond of Toulouse liquidates vast estates to equip his army. Bohemond of Taranto sees the crusade as an opportunity to carve out new territories in the East. These aren't just individual decisions. They represent a massive transfer of European wealth and resources toward Eastern expansion. The armies that converge on Constantinople in late 1096 represent the greatest military force Europe has assembled since the fall of Rome. But they also represent something more. The first organized contact between medieval European civilization and the advanced Islamic world. The Crusaders think they're traveling to reclaim Christian territory from barbarous infidels. They're actually about to encounter societies more sophisticated, wealthy, and technologically advanced than anything in their experience. Emperor Alexius Comnenus of Byzantium watches these Western armies approach his capital with growing alarm. He had requested military assistance, a few thousand professional soldiers to help defend his borders. Instead, he faces hundreds of thousands of armed pilgrims whose religious enthusiasm makes them nearly impossible to control and whose military capabilities remain untested. The cultural collision begins immediately. The Crusaders are amazed by Constantinople's size, wealth, and sophistication. The city contains more people than most Western European kingdoms, displays technological marvels unknown in the West, and demonstrates levels of learning and artistic achievement that seem almost supernatural to visitors from Europe's rural, isolated communities. But the Byzantines are equally shocked by their Western allies. The Crusaders seem crude, violent, and religiously fanatical, compared to the subtle, diplomatic, and theologically sophisticated Eastern Christians. Their demands for immediate action against Muslim territories conflict with Byzantine preferences for careful negotiation and strategic patience. As the crusading armies prepare to cross into Asia Minor, both sides are beginning to understand that this holy war will transform everyone involved in ways that no one has anticipated. The Europeans are about to receive an education in Islamic civilization that will change their understanding of technology, science, commerce, and culture. The Muslims and Byzantines are about to confront European military techniques and religious intensity that will force them to adapt their own institutions and strategies. The collision of civilizations is beginning, and its consequences will echo across centuries. October 1097, outside the massive walls of Antioch, the greatest fortress city of the Eastern Mediterranean, a European army settles in for what will become the longest, most brutal, and most educationally transformative siege of the First Crusade. The Crusaders think they're simply trying to capture an important military objective. They don't realize they're about to receive a crash course in Islamic civilization that will change European society forever. Antioch isn't just a city, it's a masterpiece of military engineering and urban planning that demonstrates Islamic technological and organizational superiority over anything the Crusaders have encountered. The walls rise 60 feet high and stretch for 9 miles, incorporating advanced defensive features that European military engineers have never seen. Angled towers that eliminate blind spots, multiple concentric barriers that force attackers to overcome successive defensive lines, and sophisticated water management systems that can sustain the city indefinitely under siege. Prince Bohemond of Taranto, the Norman leader whose strategic brilliance will eventually capture the city, spends his first weeks outside Antioch, not planning attacks but studying Islamic engineering techniques. His siege engineers examine the walls with growing respect for the mathematical precision and architectural sophistication of their Islamic builders. They begin to understand that they're confronting a civilization with superior technical knowledge. Inside the city, the Muslim defenders, led by Yagi Siyan, employ military tactics that astonish the European besiegers. They coordinate multiple simultaneous sorties using trumpet signals and flag communications. They deploy Greek fire and other incendiary weapons that seem almost magical to crusaders accustomed to conventional medieval warfare. Most impressively, they maintain supply lines and intelligence networks that keep the city provisioned and informed despite the siege. But the real education begins when winter arrives, and the crusading army faces starvation outside Antioch's walls. The Crusaders discover that their European logistical methods are completely inadequate for sustained operations in eastern terrain and climate. They don't understand local agricultural cycles, can't establish reliable supply lines, and lack the commercial networks necessary to purchase provisions from regional merchants. Salvation comes from an unexpected source. Local Eastern Christians and Muslim merchants who teach the Crusaders how to survive in the Middle Eastern environment. They learn about new foods that provide better nutrition than European diets. Rice, citrus fruits, spices that preserve meat and improve health. They discover irrigation techniques that can support agriculture in semi-arid climates. They master horse breeding methods that produce animals better suited to desert warfare. Most importantly, they begin to understand the sophisticated commercial networks that connect the Islamic world from Spain to Central Asia. Muslim merchants demonstrate accounting techniques, credit systems, and international banking methods that make possible trade operations spanning thousands of miles. They introduce Europeans to mathematical concepts, including the number zero, that revolutionize calculation and record keeping. The siege also forces cultural exchange that breaks down religious prejudices on both sides. Christian and Muslim physicians work together to treat wounded soldiers, sharing medical knowledge that combines European surgical techniques with Islamic pharmacology and anatomical understanding. European knights discover that many Muslim warriors share their concepts of honor, courtesy, and martial skill. When Antioch finally falls in June 1098, through Bohemon's brilliant strategy of suborning a guard, the Crusaders find themselves in possession of a city that serves as a window into Islamic civilization. The libraries contain the manuscripts on subjects unknown in Europe: advanced mathematics, experimental science, philosophical works that synthesize Greek learning with Islamic innovation, geographical texts that describe trade routes to India and China. Bohemond, recognizing the value of what he's discovered, begins a systematic program of cultural appropriation. He employs Islamic administrators who understand tax collection, urban management, and international diplomacy. He adopts Muslim military techniques, including the use of mounted archers and siege engines of Islamic design. He establishes commercial relationships with Muslim merchants who can provide goods and services unavailable from European sources. But perhaps most significantly, Bohemond and other Crusader leaders begin to understand that the Islamic world isn't a monolithic enemy, but a complex civilization with internal divisions that can be exploited. They learn about the rivalry between Sunni and Shia Muslims, the tensions between Turkish military elites and Arab populations, the competition between different Islamic kingdoms for control of trade routes and territorial dominance. By the time the Crusaders leave Antioch to continue their march toward Jerusalem, they've been fundamentally changed by their encounter with Islamic civilization. They're no longer the crude provincial warriors who arrived from Europe. They've become hybrid figures, part European knight, part Middle Eastern warlord, who understand both worlds and can operate effectively in either. This transformation will have profound consequences, not just for the success of the Crusade, but for the future development of European civilization. The knowledge, techniques, and perspectives gained at Antioch will be carried back to Europe by returning Crusaders, sparking intellectual and technological innovations that will eventually produce the Renaissance and European global expansion. July 15, 1099, the walls of Jerusalem echo with the sounds of conquest as Godfrey of Bouillon's Crusaders storm the holy city in a 3-day orgy of violence that will haunt Christian-Muslim relations for centuries. But beyond the immediate tragedy of conquest lies a more complex story: the creation of the Crusader states, hybrid societies that will serve as laboratories for cultural exchange and technological innovation between East and West. Within a year of Jerusalem's capture, European settlers have established 4 distinct principalities along the eastern Mediterranean coast: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. These aren't simple military occupations. They're ambitious experiments in cross-cultural governance that will last for nearly 2 centuries and fundamentally alter both Islamic and European civilizations. King Baldwin I of Jerusalem faces challenges that no European ruler has ever confronted. He must govern a population that's overwhelmingly Muslim and Eastern Christian, manage an economy based on long-distance trade with Islamic partners, and defend territory using military techniques adapted from both European and Middle Eastern traditions. The solutions he develops will influence European political and economic development for centuries. The Crusader states succeed by becoming cultural hybrids rather than European colonies. Baldwin adopts Islamic administrative practices because they're more sophisticated than European feudal systems. He employs Muslim officials who understand tax collection, urban management, and commercial law. He maintains Islamic legal systems for Muslim subjects while establishing European courts for Christian settlers. Most remarkably, the Crusader states developed new forms of religious tolerance born from practical necessity. Muslims, Jews, and various Christian denominations must coexist for the states to function economically. While religious tensions certainly exist, the daily reality involves unprecedented cooperation between different faith communities. In the markets of Acre, the greatest commercial city of the Crusader states, European merchants learn Islamic business practices that will transform Mediterranean trade. They master the use of letters of credit that enable long-distance commerce without transporting precious metals. They adopt Islamic accounting systems that track complex multi-party transactions. They develop partnerships with Muslim traders that span from London to Baghdad. The military orders, the Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and Teutonic Knights, represent another revolutionary innovation. These organizations combine monastic discipline with military professionalism to create new forms of international organization. They develop banking systems that allow pilgrims to deposit money in Europe and withdraw it in the Holy Land. They establish hospitals that provide medical care using both European and Islamic techniques. The architectural legacy of the Crusader states reveals the depth of cultural fusion taking place. Crusader castles like Crac de Chevalier incorporate Islamic military engineering with European defensive concepts to create fortifications superior to anything built in either civilization alone. Churches built in the Crusader states blend European Romanesque architecture with Islamic decorative elements and engineering techniques. Perhaps most importantly, the Crusader states serve as conduits for the transmission of Islamic knowledge to Europe. Universities in the West begin receiving Arabic texts on mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and natural science translated by scholars working in Crusader territories. European students travel to Jerusalem and Antioch to study subjects unavailable in Paris or Bologna. The agricultural innovations developed in the Crusader states prove equally transformative. European settlers learn Islamic irrigation techniques that enable cultivation in semi-arid climates. They adopt new crops, sugarcane, cotton, citrus fruits, that will eventually be transplanted to European colonies in the New World. They master animal husbandry techniques that produce horses and cattle better adapted to challenging environments. Women in the Crusader states enjoy greater legal rights and economic opportunities than their counterparts in Europe. The shortage of European settlers and the need for skilled administrators create opportunities for women to inherit property, manage businesses, and exercise political influence. Several women rule Crusader territories as regents or queens, regnant, establishing precedents that will influence European attitudes toward female governance. The Crusader states also developed new forms of military technology through the fusion of European and Islamic techniques. They perfect the use of crossbows, improve siege engine design, and develop new armor and weapons that combine the best features of both traditions. These innovations will be carried back to Europe by returning Crusaders and will influence European military development for centuries. By 1150, the Crusader states have become something unprecedented in medieval history. Successful multicultural societies that demonstrate the possibility of cooperation between different civilizations. They prove that Europeans can adapt to Middle Eastern conditions, that Muslims and Christians can work together when it serves mutual interests, and that cultural exchange can produce innovations superior to either tradition alone. The year 1169 marks a turning point in the struggle for the Holy Land, as a young Kurdish military commander named Yusuf ibn Ayyub, later known to history as Saladin, takes control of Egypt and begins the systematic campaign that will recapture Jerusalem and reshape the relationship between Islam and Christianity forever. But Saladin's revolution isn't just military, it's cultural, introducing concepts of chivalric honor and religious tolerance that will influence both Islamic and European civilizations. Saladin inherits a fractured Islamic world where competing Muslim rulers fight each other as often as they fight the Crusaders. The Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt is weak and corrupt. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad has lost effective power. Turkish military commanders control various Syrian cities in loose confederation. The lack of Islamic unity has enabled the Crusader states to survive and prosper, despite being vastly outnumbered by Muslim populations. But Saladin possesses something his predecessors lacked: a comprehensive vision for Islamic revival that combines military excellence with political wisdom and religious devotion. He understands that defeating the Crusaders requires more than battlefield victories. It demands the creation of a unified Islamic state capable of mobilizing the full resources of the Muslim world. His first innovations are administrative and economic. Saladin reorganizes Egyptian agriculture using advanced irrigation techniques that increase agricultural productivity. He reforms tax collection to eliminate corruption while ensuring adequate revenue for military campaigns. He establishes trade relationships that connect Egypt with Islamic territories from Spain to Central Asia, creating economic networks that can fund sustained warfare. More importantly, Saladin begins a cultural revolution within Islam itself. He promotes religious scholars who preach jihad not as mindless violence, but as disciplined struggle for justice and social improvement. He establishes schools and hospitals that demonstrate Islamic commitment to learning and charity. He develops a code of military conduct that emphasizes protection of non-combatants, respect for religious sites, and humane treatment of prisoners. This approach proves strategically brilliant because it appeals to Muslim populations who have grown tired of corrupt and ineffective leadership. Saladin's reputation for justice and piety enables him to unify Islamic territories that had been divided for decades. One by one, Syrian cities acknowledge his authority, drawn by his promise of effective defense against Crusader expansion. The Crusaders initially underestimate Saladin's threat because he seems too concerned with Islamic internal affairs to pose immediate danger to Christian territories. They fail to understand that his consolidation of Muslim power is specifically designed to eliminate the divisions that have enabled Crusader success. By the time they recognize the danger, Saladin has created a unified Islamic state stretching from Egypt to northern Syria. Saladin's military innovations prove equally important. He develops new cavalry techniques that combine Turkish mounted archery with Arab mobility and Kurdish discipline. He creates professional corps of engineers who master siege warfare, enabling him to capture heavily fortified Crusader positions. He establishes intelligence networks that provide detailed information about Crusader military capabilities and political divisions. But perhaps most significantly, Saladin begins systematic psychological warfare designed to undermine Crusader morale and encourage Muslim resistance. He demonstrates that Islamic armies can defeat European forces through superior strategy and discipline rather than just numerical advantage. He shows Muslim populations that unified Islamic leadership can provide effective protection against foreign invasion. The culmination comes at the Battle of Hattin in July 1187, where Saladin destroys the largest Crusader army ever assembled in the East. The victory isn't just military, it's psychological and cultural. Saladin demonstrates Islamic military superiority while simultaneously showing remarkable clemency toward defeated enemies. He ransoms Christian prisoners rather than slaughtering them, respects Christian religious sites even while capturing them, and treats captured nobles with courtesy that European chroniclers find surprising and admirable. When Saladin recaptures Jerusalem in October 1187, his conduct provides a stark contrast to the Crusader conquest nearly a century earlier. Instead of massacring the city's Christian population, he arranges for their safe departure. Instead of destroying Christian holy sites, he preserves them while restoring Islamic religious buildings. His generosity creates a propaganda victory that resonates throughout both the Islamic and Christian worlds. European responses to Saladin reveal the depth of cultural change the Crusades have produced. Instead of depicting him as a savage infidel, European chroniclers portray Saladin as a noble adversary whose chivalric virtues European knights should emulate. His reputation for honor and justice becomes legendary even among his enemies, establishing new standards for military conduct that will influence European concepts of chivalry. The Third Crusade, launched in response to Saladin's victories, becomes a different kind of conflict, one characterized by mutual respect between opponents who recognize each other's martial excellence and moral integrity. The relationship between Saladin and Richard the Lionheart exemplifies this new dynamic. Bitter enemies who nevertheless maintain correspondence, exchange gifts, and develop personal respect across religious and cultural boundaries. By his death in 1193, Saladin has transformed the nature of Christian-Muslim conflict from religious war to something more complex, a struggle between civilizations that recognize each other's legitimacy even while competing for territorial and cultural dominance. His legacy will influence both Islamic and European concepts of leadership, military conduct, and interreligious relations for centuries. While knights and sultans battle for control of the Holy Land, a quieter but more lasting revolution is taking place in the counting houses and warehouses of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa. The Italian maritime republics are using the Crusades to establish commercial networks that will make them the richest powers in the Mediterranean and teach Europe the economic techniques that will eventually enable global expansion. Enrico Dandolo, the blind doge of Venice, understands something that military leaders miss. The Crusades represent the greatest commercial opportunity in European history. The movement of hundreds of thousands of people and massive amounts of wealth toward the east creates unprecedented demand for transportation, supplies, and financial services. More importantly, the establishment of European settlements in the Middle East opens new markets and trade routes that can generate profits for centuries. When the leaders of the Fourth Crusade approach Venice for transportation to the Holy Land, Dandolo negotiates a contract that reveals the sophistication of Italian commercial thinking. Venice will provide ships and supplies worth 85,000 marks of silver, a sum equivalent to the annual revenues of major European kingdoms. In exchange, Venice receives not just payment, but a share of any conquest the Crusaders achieve, effectively making the Republic a partner in territorial expansion. But Dandolo's real innovation is the decision to divert the Fourth Crusade to Constantinople, the greatest commercial city in the medieval world. Officially, this diversion results from political complications and the Crusaders' inability to pay their full debt to Venice. Actually, it represents a calculated strategy to eliminate Byzantine commercial competition and establish Venetian dominance over Eastern Mediterranean trade. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 proves economically transformative for Italian maritime cities. Venetian merchants gain access to trade routes that connect the Mediterranean with the Black Sea, Central Asia, and the Indian Ocean. They acquire privileges in Byzantine territories that eliminate tariffs and provide legal advantages over local competitors. Most importantly, they obtain Greek manuscripts and knowledge that will fuel the Renaissance intellectual revival. Genoa and Pisa quickly adapt to Venetian innovations, establishing their own commercial networks in Crusader territories. Genoese merchants specialize in connections with North Africa and Spain, developing trade relationships with Muslim territories, even while their compatriots fight Muslims in the Holy Land. Pisan traders focus on connections with southern Italy and Sicily, creating commercial links that span the entire Mediterranean. These commercial networks prove more durable than military conquests. Long after Crusader armies are defeated and expelled from the Holy Land, Italian merchants maintain profitable relationships with Muslim rulers who recognize that trade benefits both sides regardless of religious differences. Commercial logic proves stronger than religious ideology. The financial innovations developed to support crusading activities transform European banking and investment. Italian bankers create new instruments for international money transfer, enabling merchants to conduct business across vast distances without transporting precious metals. They develop insurance systems that protect against the risks of long-distance trade. They establish credit networks that connect European and Middle Eastern markets. Perhaps most importantly, Italian merchants learn to think globally rather than locally. They understand that prosperity depends on connections with distant markets rather than just local production. They develop the commercial techniques, partnership agreements, joint stock companies, international banking that will eventually enable European expansion into Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The architectural legacy of this commercial revolution can still be seen in Italian cities. The wealth generated by Eastern trade finances, the construction of magnificent palaces, churches, and public buildings that demonstrate the cultural sophistication purchased with crusading profits. Venice's San Marco Basilica incorporates Byzantine architectural elements and artistic treasures acquired during the sack of Constantinople. Women play crucial roles in this commercial expansion. Italian merchant families often send male members on long trading expeditions while women manage domestic operations. Many women become sophisticated business operators who handle complex financial transactions, manage international correspondence, and make strategic decisions about commercial investments. The technological innovations that emerge from crusading commerce prove equally significant. Italian shipbuilders develop new vessel designs that can carry larger cargoes more safely across greater distances. They perfect navigation techniques that enable reliable travel to distant markets. They create new manufacturing processes that produce goods specifically designed for export to Eastern markets. By 1250, the Italian maritime republics have established commercial empires that span from London to Constantinople and from Alexandria to the Black Sea. They've created the economic infrastructure that will support European expansion and demonstrate the possibility of peaceful cooperation between different civilizations for mutual commercial benefit. Most importantly, they've proven that economic power can be more effective than military force for achieving lasting influence. While Crusader armies come and go, Italian merchants establish permanent relationships that outlast political changes and religious conflicts. Their commercial networks provide the foundation for European global expansion and demonstrate the transformative power of trade over conquest. The year 1212 witnesses one of the most tragic and revealing episodes in crusading history, as thousands of children across France and Germany become convinced that their innocence can achieve what adult armies have failed to accomplish. the peaceful reconquest of Jerusalem through divine intervention. The Children's Crusade exposes both the depth of religious enthusiasm generated by 2 centuries of holy war and the dangerous consequences of uncritical faith. In the village of Cloyes near Chartres, a 12-year-old shepherd boy named Stephen claims to have received a vision of Christ, commanding him to lead a crusade of children to Jerusalem. Christ promised, according to Stephen, that the Mediterranean Sea would part before the children's pure faith, allowing them to walk to the Holy Land, where Muslims would be so moved by their innocence that they would convert to Christianity voluntarily. Stephen's message spreads with stunning speed through a France already saturated with crusading propaganda. Children abandon their families, apprenticeships, and responsibilities to join what they believe is a divinely commanded mission. The movement attracts not just children, but adults seeking religious redemption, merchants hoping to profit from the expedition, and clerics who see opportunities for spiritual advancement. Simultaneously, in the German Rhineland, another child named Nicholas preaches a similar message to crowds of young followers. His version promises that the children will not only reconquer Jerusalem, but will also convert the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope to a purer form of Christianity. The German Children's Crusade attracts thousands of participants who march toward Italy, expecting divine miracles to facilitate their journey. Pope Innocent III faces a dilemma that reveals the contradictions inherent in crusading ideology. He cannot officially condemn movements that claim divine inspiration and pursue the same goals as papal crusades. But he also cannot endorse expeditions that ignore practical planning, military preparation, and adult supervision. His hesitant response reflects the Church's growing uncertainty about the relationship between religious enthusiasm and realistic policy. The French Children's Crusade reaches its climax at Marseille, where Stephen promises the sea will part to allow passage to the Holy Land. When no miracle occurs, the movement fragments as disillusioned children abandon the expedition or fall victim to merchants who promise transportation to the east but actually sell them into slavery. Some contemporary accounts suggest that thousands of children disappear into North African slave markets. The German expedition meets equally tragic ends, as children attempt to cross the Alps without adequate supplies or preparation. Many die from exposure, starvation, or disease. Others are turned back by Italian authorities, who refuse to allow passage through their territories. A few may have reached Mediterranean ports, only to face the same exploitation that destroyed the French movement. The Children's Crusade reveals several disturbing aspects of crusading culture that adult expeditions have obscured. The promise of miraculous intervention reflects unrealistic expectations about divine support for military operations. The emphasis on purity and innocence suggests that crusading ideology has become detached from practical considerations of logistics, strategy, and political context. More significantly, the Children's Crusade demonstrates how crusading propaganda has penetrated European society so thoroughly that even children understand themselves as potential participants in holy war. The expeditions reveal a culture saturated with militaristic religious imagery that presents violence as the primary means of serving God and achieving salvation. The response of European authorities to the Children's Crusade varies significantly and reveals changing attitudes toward crusading in general. Some officials try to prevent children from leaving their communities, recognizing that the expeditions are likely to end in disaster. Others facilitate the movements, either from genuine religious conviction or from desire to eliminate social problems by exporting them. The economic dimensions of the Children's Crusade prove equally revealing. Merchants quickly recognize opportunities to profit from the movements by selling supplies, transportation, and services to participants and their families. Some exploit the children directly through false promises and fraudulent contracts. The expeditions become commercial ventures disguised as religious movements. The failure of the Children's Crusade has lasting consequences for European attitudes toward crusading. It demonstrates that religious enthusiasm alone cannot overcome practical obstacles, and that divine intervention cannot be relied upon to substitute for careful planning and adequate resources. The tragic outcomes force many Europeans to question whether crusading ideology has become dangerously detached from reality. By 1215, the Children's Crusade has become a cautionary tale that influenced later crusading efforts. Subsequent expeditions place greater emphasis on practical preparation and adult leadership. The Church develops more careful procedures for evaluating claims of divine revelation and becomes more skeptical of mass popular movements that claim supernatural authority. The Children's Crusade ultimately serves as a watershed moment in crusading history, marking the transition from the confident enthusiasm of early expeditions to the more complex and troubled later campaigns that must confront the gap between religious idealism and political reality. May 18th, 1291. The massive walls of Acre, the greatest fortress city of the Crusader states, tremble under the impact of Mamluk siege engines as Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil's army delivers the final blow to 2 centuries of European presence in the Holy Land. The fall of Acre represents more than military defeat. It marks the end of the crusading era and the beginning of new forms of conflict between Islam and Christianity. The siege of Acre reveals how profoundly warfare has evolved since the first Crusaders stumbled through Anatolia 2 centuries earlier. The Mamluk army employs sophisticated siege techniques learned from generations of conflict with European forces. Their engineers deploy massive trebuchets capable of hurling stones weighing over 300 pounds. Their sappers dig complex underground tunnels to undermine fortress walls. Their logistics networks ensure steady supplies of food, weapons, and ammunition for extended operations. Inside it, the defenders represent what remains of crusading civilization, a cosmopolitan mixture of European knights, Italian merchants, local Christians, and even some Muslim allies who have chosen to support the Crusader states against Mamluk expansion. Their desperate resistance demonstrates both the military effectiveness that Crusader technology has achieved and the fundamental limitations that make long-term survival impossible. King Henry II of Cyprus, the nominal ruler of what remains of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, coordinates the defense with resources that reveal the economic transformation the Crusades have produced. Venetian and Genoese merchants contribute funds and supplies. The military orders deploy financial resources accumulated over centuries. Papal taxation throughout Europe provides emergency funding for relief expeditions, but these resources prove inadequate against the systematic Mamluk campaign to eliminate European presence from the eastern Mediterranean. Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil represents a new generation of Islamic leadership that has learned both military and diplomatic lessons from 2 centuries of crusading conflict. His army combines the best features of Turkish cavalry, Arab logistics, and Egyptian naval power. The Mamluk military system itself represents innovations forced by crusading pressure. Originally slave soldiers recruited from Central Asian and Caucasian populations, the Mamluks have evolved into a professional military caste that dominates Islamic Middle Eastern politics. Their training methods combine Islamic religious devotion with practical military excellence to produce warriors superior to both European knights and traditional Arab cavalry. When Acre's outer defences finally collapse, the fighting that follows demonstrates how brutal medieval warfare has become after 2 centuries of religious conflict. Neither side shows mercy to captured enemies. The Mamluks systematically demolish Acre's fortifications to prevent any possibility of European reoccupation. European survivors face enslavement or death. The fall of Acre triggers the collapse of remaining Crusader territories within weeks. Tyre, Sidon, Beirut, and other coastal cities surrender without resistance. as their garrisons recognized the futility of continued resistance. By August 1291, European political control over Holy Land territory has ended completely for the first time since 1099. European responses to the loss of the Holy Land reveal how profoundly the Crusades have changed Western civilization. Instead of immediate calls for new expeditions to reconquer lost territories, European leaders focus on analyzing what went wrong and how future conflicts might be conducted more effectively. The military lessons learned from crusading failure will influence European warfare for centuries. Pope Nicholas IV issues calls for a new crusade, but European rulers are reluctant to commit resources to ventures that have proven so costly and ultimately unsuccessful. The economic benefits of Eastern trade, established during 2 centuries of crusading, can now be maintained through commercial relationships rather than military occupation. Italian merchants quickly negotiate new agreements with Mamluk authorities to preserve their profitable Eastern connections. The military innovations developed during the crusading period proved more durable than territorial conquests. European armies retained the improved cavalry techniques, siege technologies, and logistical methods learned through conflict with Islamic forces. These innovations will prove crucial for later European expansion into other regions where Islamic military techniques are less advanced. Perhaps most significantly, the end of the Crusader states forces European civilization to confront fundamental questions about the relationship between religious devotion and political success. The failure to maintain Christian control over the Holy Land, despite enormous expenditure of resources and lives, suggests that divine favor cannot be assumed to support even the most religiously motivated enterprises. The intellectual impact proves equally profound. European scholars who had access to Islamic learning through crusading contacts must now find new ways to continue cultural exchange. The translation movement that brought Islamic scientific and philosophical works to Europe continues through commercial and diplomatic channels rather than military occupation. By 1300, the fall of Acre has been absorbed into European consciousness, not as catastrophic defeat, but as a necessary stage in the evolution toward more effective forms of expansion. The lessons learned from crusading failure, the importance of naval power, the necessity of sustainable logistics, the value of local alliances, will guide European success in later encounters with African, Asian, and American civilizations. Beyond the battles and sieges, the Crusades represent one of history's most sustained attempts to implement religious idealism through political action. For 2 centuries, European society committed enormous resources to achieving goals that combined spiritual aspiration with territorial ambition. The ultimate failure of this experiment provides crucial insights into the relationship between faith and power. The original crusading vision promised that European society could be purified through holy war, that individual salvation could be achieved through violent service to God, and that Christian unity could be maintained through conflict with external enemies. These promises proved both inspiring and ultimately false, forcing medieval civilization to develop more complex understanding of religious obligation and political possibility. Pope Urban II's original call at Clermont assumed that European military superiority would enable quick conquest of Middle Eastern territories. This assumption reflected typical medieval ignorance about Islamic civilization's military capabilities, technological sophistication, and political organization. The reality of Islamic military excellence forced Europeans to abandon simple assumptions about Christian divine favor and develop more realistic strategic thinking. The crusading experience also revealed the difficulty of maintaining religious motivation for extended political enterprises. The initial enthusiasm that mobilized hundreds of thousands of participants inevitably diminished as campaigns became routine military operations requiring professional competence rather than spiritual fervor. By the 13th century, Crusading had become primarily a political and economic enterprise that used religious rhetoric for practical purposes. The social consequences of crusading idealism proved equally complex. The promise that holy war could provide salvation for all social classes created unprecedented opportunities for popular participation in military enterprises. Peasants, artisans, and merchants gained access to roles previously reserved for military elites. But the same religious enthusiasm that enabled social mobility also produced dangerous fanaticism that resulted in persecution of Jews, heretics, and other minority groups. The economic dimensions of crusading reveal similar contradictions between idealistic goals and practical requirements. The expeditions were justified as spiritual enterprises that placed heavenly rewards above earthly profit. But the enormous costs of crusading required systematic exploitation of European resources and the development of commercial networks that ultimately served secular rather than religious purposes. The relationship between crusading idealism and political reality becomes particularly clear in the history of the military orders. Organizations like the Knights Templar were founded to embody the perfect synthesis of religious devotion and military effectiveness. They succeeded in creating remarkably disciplined and capable forces that dominated Middle Eastern warfare for generations. But the same characteristics that made the military orders effective also made them dangerous to secular and ecclesiastical authorities. Their international organization, financial resources, and military capabilities enabled them to operate independently of royal and papal control. Their claims to religious authority conflicted with broader church hierarchy. Their accumulation of wealth and land created conflicts with other social groups. The suppression of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century reveals how completely crusading idealism had been subordinated to political calculation. King Philip IV of France destroyed the order not because it had failed to serve Christian purposes, but because it had succeeded too well and become a threat to royal authority. The charges of heresy and corruption brought against the Templars reflected political necessity rather than religious conviction. Women's experiences during the crusading period illustrate another dimension of the conflict between idealism and reality. Crusading ideology theoretically offered women opportunities to serve God through support for holy war. Many women made significant financial contributions to crusading expeditions and gained social recognition for their religious devotion. But the practical realities of crusading often harmed women's interests. The departure of male family members on crusading expeditions left women vulnerable to economic exploitation and social marginalization. The violence associated with crusading created dangerous precedents for the use of force against vulnerable populations. The religious enthusiasm generated by crusading sometimes targeted women suspected of heretical beliefs or supernatural powers. The legal and institutional legacies of crusading reflect the same tension between idealistic goals and practical implementation. The legal privileges granted to crusaders, protection from debt collection, exemption from taxation, immunity from prosecution, were intended to facilitate religious service, but often served to protect individuals from the consequences of secular crimes. The papal monarchy that emerged during the crusading period represented an attempt to implement theocratic government based on religious authority, but the practical requirements of governing crusading expeditions forced the papacy to develop increasingly secular administrative and financial techniques that undermined claims to purely spiritual authority. By 1300, European civilization had learned through painful experience that religious idealism cannot be implemented through political means without fundamental compromise of idealistic goals. This lesson would influence later European approaches to colonization, missionary activity, and international relations, generally in the direction of greater realism about the relationship between spiritual aspiration and political possibility. While chroniclers focused on battles and religious fervor, The Crusades quietly revolutionized European technology, engineering, and scientific understanding through systematic contact with Islamic civilization's advanced technical knowledge. This technological transfer would prove more historically significant than territorial conquest or religious conversion. The Siege of Antioch in 1097 to 1098 serves as a masterclass in Islamic military engineering that European observers study with growing admiration and understanding. The city's defenders employ Greek fire, an incendiary weapon that seems almost magical to crusaders accustomed to conventional medieval warfare. European engineers carefully observe its preparation and deployment, beginning the process of reverse engineering advanced chemical warfare techniques. More importantly, the prolonged siege forces European military engineers to confront Islamic innovations in fortification design. Antioch's walls incorporate mathematical principles unknown in European castle construction, angled towers that eliminate blind spots, overlapping fields of fire, and sophisticated entrance systems that channel attackers into killing zones. European castle builders will spend the next century incorporating these innovations into their own defensive systems. The Crusader encounter with Islamic siege technology proves equally transformative. Muslim engineers deploy counterweight trebuchets capable of hurling projectiles with unprecedented accuracy and force. Their siege towers incorporate sophisticated mechanical systems for scaling walls and deploying troops. European engineers begin systematic study of these machines, developing improved versions that will dominate European warfare for generations. Navigation technology represents another area of crucial knowledge transfer. Islamic navigators have developed mathematical techniques for determining position at sea using astronomical observation. They employ improved compass systems and detailed maps that enable long-distance ocean travel. European sailors working with crusading expeditions begin learning these techniques, establishing the foundation for later European exploration and expansion. Medical knowledge transfer occurs through the practical necessity of treating wounded crusaders. Islamic physicians working in Middle Eastern cities possess superior understanding of anatomy, surgical techniques, and pharmaceutical preparations. European physicians who accompany crusading expeditions receive informal education in Islamic medical practices that prove dramatically more effective than traditional European treatments. The Islamic mathematical system, including the concept of zero and positional notation, spreads to Europe primarily through crusading contact. European scholars working in Crusader states encounter Arabic mathematical texts and begin translating them for Western audiences. These mathematical innovations will revolutionize European commercial calculation, engineering design, and scientific research. Agricultural technology transfer proves equally significant for long-term European development. European settlers in the Crusader states learn Islamic irrigation techniques that enable cultivation in semi-arid climates. They adopt new crops: cotton, sugarcane, citrus fruits that require sophisticated agricultural knowledge. These innovations will later be applied to European colonial enterprises in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Textile production benefits enormously from Islamic technical knowledge. European craftsmen learn new dyeing techniques that produce colors previously unavailable in European markets. They master silk production methods and improved loom technologies that increase both productivity and quality. The textile innovations acquired through crusading contact will fuel later European commercial expansion. Metallurgical knowledge transfer occurs through systematic study of Islamic weapons and armor. Muslim metalworkers have developed superior techniques for steel production, heat treatment, and alloy composition. European armorers and weaponsmiths working in the East begin incorporating these innovations into their own production methods. Architectural and engineering knowledge spreads through European observation of Islamic construction techniques. The pointed arch, ribbed vault, and flying buttress, innovations that will enable Gothic cathedral construction, derive partially from Islamic architectural examples encountered during the Crusades. European architects working on cathedral projects adapt these techniques for Christian religious buildings. Perhaps most importantly, the Crusades expose Europeans to Islamic scientific methodology based on systematic observation and experimentation rather than reliance on ancient authorities. European scholars working in crusading territories encounter Islamic approaches to astronomy, chemistry, physics, and natural history that emphasize empirical investigation over theoretical speculation. The institutional mechanisms for knowledge transfer developed gradually through the crusading period. Translation schools established in crusading territories systematically convert Arabic scientific and philosophical texts into Latin. European students travel to Middle Eastern cities to study subjects unavailable in Western universities. Islamic scholars occasionally teach in European institutions, bringing advanced knowledge directly to Western audiences. By 1250, the technological knowledge acquired through crusading contact has begun transforming European civilization in ways that will prove more historically significant than military conquest. The engineering techniques, mathematical concepts, scientific methods, and technological innovations absorbed from Islamic civilization provide the foundation for later European achievements in exploration, scientific revolution, and global expansion. The vast financial requirements of crusading expeditions force European societies to develop new banking, credit, and investment systems that will ultimately transform the global economy. The need to move enormous amounts of money across vast distances, while maintaining security and liquidity, creates demands that traditional medieval financial systems cannot meet. Italian banking houses emerge as the primary financial facilitators of crusading activity, developing innovations that establish the foundation for modern international finance. The Medici Bank creates new instruments for international money transfer that enable crusaders to deposit funds in Europe and withdraw them in the Middle East without transporting precious metals across dangerous territory. Temple banks, operated by the Knights Templar, represent another revolutionary innovation. These institutions provide financial services specifically designed for international religious and military enterprises. They develop sophisticated credit systems, insurance programs, and investment opportunities that attract deposits from across Europe. Their international network of commanderies functions as the first truly global banking system. The credit systems developed to finance crusading expeditions prove particularly innovative. Italian bankers create new forms of partnership agreements that distribute both profits and risks among multiple investors. They develop early versions of joint stock companies that enable smaller investors to participate in large-scale ventures. These innovations will later be applied to commercial ventures in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Insurance systems emerge from the practical necessity of protecting crusading investments against the enormous risks of international military expeditions. Italian insurers develop policies that cover losses from shipwreck, military defeat, disease, and other hazards that threaten crusading enterprises. These insurance innovations establish precedents for later commercial insurance that will enable European global trade. The mathematical innovations required for complex international finance spread through Europe primarily as a result of crusading financial demands. The Arabic number system, including the concept of zero, proves essential for the accurate calculation of exchange rates, compound interest, and international payments. European bankers become among the first Western adopters of advanced mathematical techniques. Accounting systems develop rapidly to meet the record-keeping requirements of multi-year international expeditions involving thousands of participants and enormous expenditures. Italian bankers perfect double-entry bookkeeping systems that enable accurate tracking of complex financial transactions. These accounting innovations will prove crucial for later European commercial expansion. Currency standardization becomes necessary to facilitate international transactions involving multiple European kingdoms and Middle Eastern territories. Italian banking houses develop standardized exchange rates and conversion systems that enable efficient international trade. These currency innovations establish the foundation for later European monetary systems. Commercial law evolves to address the legal complexities of international crusading finance. European courts develop new legal frameworks for international partnerships, credit agreements, and insurance contracts. Canon law adapts to permit certain forms of interest payment previously forbidden as usury. These legal innovations create the institutional framework for later capitalist development. The Templars' banking network demonstrates both the possibilities and dangers of international financial institutions. At the height of their power, the Templars control financial resources equivalent to the treasuries of major European kingdoms. Their credit is accepted from London to Jerusalem. Their financial expertise makes them indispensable to both royal and papal authorities. But the Templars' financial success also makes them politically dangerous. Their wealth enables them to operate independently of traditional authorities. Their international organization creates conflicts with national sovereignty. Their financial knowledge gives them influence over royal and papal policy. These tensions eventually lead to their suppression, demonstrating the political limits of financial power. Women participate in crusading finance through both direct investment and indirect support. Wealthy women contribute substantial resources to crusading expeditions and receive formal recognition for their financial support. Some women become sophisticated investors who use crusading opportunities to diversify their financial holdings. Female religious communities often serve as banking intermediaries for crusading finance. The taxation systems developed to fund crusading expeditions revolutionize European fiscal administration. Papal taxation creates the first systematic international tax collection system in European history. Royal taxation for crusading purposes establishes precedents for regular taxation that will transform European governmental finance. These fiscal innovations provide the foundation for later European state development. By 1300, the financial innovations generated by crusading requirements have created the institutional foundation for European commercial expansion. The banking techniques, credit systems, insurance mechanisms, and international finance networks developed to support Holy War will be adapted to support secular commercial ventures that will ultimately prove more successful than military conquest in establishing European global influence. The daily reality of life in the Crusader states involves constant cultural exchange that gradually transforms both European and Middle Eastern civilizations. Despite the religious warfare that dominates historical narratives, practical necessities force Christians, Muslims, and Jews to develop new forms of cooperation, communication, and mutual understanding. In the markets of Accra, European merchants conduct business with Muslim traders using hybrid commercial languages that combine Arabic, Latin, French, and Italian vocabulary. These pidgin languages develop sophisticated commercial terminology that enables complex international transactions despite religious and cultural barriers. The linguistic innovations that emerge from crusading contact will influence European languages for centuries. Culinary fusion occurs as European settlers adapt to Middle Eastern diets and cooking techniques. Crusader communities develop hybrid cuisines that combine European ingredients with Islamic spices and preparation methods. Sugar, previously unknown in Europe, becomes a luxury commodity that European merchants introduce to Western markets. These culinary innovations will later be transplanted to European colonies throughout the world. Artistic exchange produces new aesthetic styles that blend European and Islamic visual traditions. Crusader manuscripts incorporate Islamic decorative elements and geometric patterns. Islamic craftsmen working for European patrons adapt their techniques to Christian religious themes. The artistic fusion that develops in the Crusader states influences both European and Islamic art for generations. Musical exchange occurs through practical interactions between European and Middle Eastern court cultures. European musicians learn Islamic musical theory, instrument construction, and performance techniques. Islamic musicians adapt their compositions for European audiences. The musical innovations that emerge from this exchange will influence European musical development throughout the Renaissance period. Educational exchange develops as European scholars gain access to Islamic educational institutions and library collections. European students study subjects in Middle Eastern cities that are unavailable in Western universities. Islamic scholars occasionally teach in European institutions. The educational exchanges that result from crusading contact accelerate the transmission of Islamic learning to European intellectual circles. Legal system fusion occurs as Crusader states develop hybrid legal frameworks that accommodate both European and Middle Eastern legal traditions. Commercial law incorporates Islamic commercial practices that prove superior to European legal traditions. Family law adapts to address the complexities of mixed marriages and cross-cultural inheritance. These legal innovations will influence European legal development for centuries. Religious dialogue develops despite the warfare that officially motivates crusading expeditions. European and Islamic scholars engage in theological discussions that explore similarities and differences between Christian and Islamic beliefs. These religious exchanges, while often tense and competitive, create new forms of interreligious understanding that will influence later European approaches to non-Christian religions. Urban planning innovations emerge as Crusader cities adapt European civic institutions to Middle Eastern urban environments. City governments develop new approaches to managing multicultural populations. Public services adapt to serve diverse religious and ethnic communities. The urban innovations that develop in crusading territories will influence later European colonial administration. Women's roles in cultural exchange prove particularly significant because they often serve as cultural intermediaries between different communities. European women who marry Middle Eastern men become bridges between civilizations. Muslim and Jewish women who work for European employers facilitate daily cultural communication. Female religious communities often provide neutral spaces for cross-cultural interaction. Technological fusion occurs as European and Islamic craftsmen work together on construction projects, military preparations, and commercial enterprises. European engineers learn Islamic mathematical and engineering techniques. Islamic craftsmen adapt their skills to European requirements. The technological fusion that results from these collaborations will influence both civilizations for generations. Medical practice represents one of the most successful areas of cultural fusion. European and Islamic physicians work together to treat wounded soldiers and civilian patients. Medical knowledge transfer occurs through practical collaboration rather than theoretical study. The medical innovations that emerge from this cooperation will influence European medical practice for centuries. Commercial fusion develops as European and Islamic merchants create new forms of business partnership that cross religious and cultural boundaries. Joint ventures enable both sides to benefit from cultural exchange while minimizing political risks. Commercial relationships often prove more durable than political alliances, continuing even during periods of active warfare. By 1250, the cultural fusion that has developed in the Crusader states has created new forms of civilization that combine elements from European, Islamic, and Byzantine traditions. While political control of these territories will ultimately revert to Islamic authorities, the cultural innovations that emerge from crusading contact will continue to influence both European and Middle Eastern civilizations for centuries. Behind the male-dominated narratives of crusading warfare lies a remarkable story of female leadership, political maneuvering, and military command that challenges traditional assumptions about medieval women's roles. The unique circumstances of crusading society create unprecedented opportunities for women to exercise power and influence. Eleanor of Aquitaine represents the pinnacle of female crusading leadership. As Queen of France during the Second Crusade, she leads her own contingent of troops and participates directly in military planning. Her political influence extends beyond ceremonial roles to include strategic decision-making that affects the entire expedition. Her later role as Queen of England demonstrates how crusading experience enables women to exercise expanded political authority. Melisenda of Jerusalem exemplifies successful female rule in crusading territories. As Queen of Jerusalem from 1131 to 1153, she governs the most important Crusader state through sophisticated political maneuvering and diplomatic skill. Her reign demonstrates that women can successfully manage the complex multicultural politics of the Middle East. Her architectural patronage creates some of the most impressive buildings in crusading territories. The military orders create new opportunities for female religious leadership through institutions like the Knights of St. John's female branches. These organizations provide women with roles in military logistics, medical care, and financial administration that approach the responsibilities exercised by male knights. Female religious leaders in these organizations exercise authority over substantial resources and personnel. Countess Ida of Boulogne demonstrates how aristocratic women finance and organize crusading expeditions. She mortgages her extensive lands to fund her husband's participation in the First Crusade and assumes responsibility for governing his territories during his absence. Her financial and administrative capabilities prove crucial for the success of his military expedition. Islamic sources document European women's participation in combat roles that European chroniclers often minimize or ignore. Muslim observers describe female warriors who fight alongside male crusaders and who command their own military units. These accounts suggest that crusading warfare creates opportunities for female military leadership that peacetime European society would not permit. Constance of Antioch exercises political power that exceeds most male rulers through her strategic marriages and diplomatic alliances. As Princess of Antioch, she uses marriage negotiations to advance political goals and maintain independence from both European and Byzantine interference. Her political skills enable her to preserve Antioch's autonomy despite enormous external pressures. The commercial opportunities created by crusading enable some women to achieve financial independence and business success. Female merchants establish trading operations that span from Europe to the Middle East. Some women become major investors in crusading expeditions and commercial ventures. Their business success provides them with resources to exercise political influence independently of male relatives. Female pilgrimage leaders organize and command mixed gender groups traveling to the Holy Land. These women exercise authority over logistics, route planning, and safety arrangements for hundreds of participants. Their leadership roles in pilgrimage expeditions provide precedents for female authority that influence broader social attitudes toward women's capabilities. Medical service provides another avenue for female participation in crusading activities. Women serve as battlefield surgeons, hospital administrators, and medical researchers who develop new treatments for wounds and diseases common in Middle Eastern warfare. Their medical expertise makes them valuable and respected members of crusading communities. Diplomatic roles enable some women to exercise international political influence. Female ambassadors negotiate agreements between Crusader states and Islamic authorities. Their diplomatic skills prove particularly valuable for maintaining the delicate relationships necessary for survival in the multicultural Middle East. Some women become trusted intermediaries between opposing rulers. Religious authority provides women with platforms for exercising spiritual leadership that extends to political influence. Female mystics and religious teachers attract followings that include male political leaders. Their religious authority enables them to influence policy decisions and military strategies. Some women become unofficial advisors to male rulers on both religious and secular matters. The unique legal environment of the Crusader states creates opportunities for women to exercise property rights and legal authority that exceed their privileges in European territories. Crusader law codes recognize female inheritance rights and legal standing that enable women to control substantial resources independently. These legal innovations influence later European legal development. Marriage strategies become tools for female political maneuvering as women use their matrimonial choices to advance political goals. Strategic marriages enable women to forge alliances, acquire resources, and exercise influence across cultural boundaries. Some women maintain power through successive marriages that advance their political objectives. By 1200, women's roles in crusading society have expanded far beyond traditional medieval expectations. While these opportunities are largely limited to aristocratic women and remain constrained by broader cultural assumptions about gender roles, they establish precedents for female leadership that will influence later European social development. As our journey through the Crusades draws to a close, we must confront the sobering reality that this medieval conflict between Christianity and Islam continues to influence global politics, international relations, and religious tensions into the present day. The crusading legacy extends far beyond the Middle Ages, shaping European expansion, colonial attitudes, and modern geopolitical conflicts in ways that are both profound and troubling. The technological and intellectual innovations gained through crusading contact enabled European global expansion beginning in the 15th century. Portuguese and Spanish explorers employed navigation techniques learned from Islamic sources. European colonial administrators adapted governmental methods developed in the Crusader states. The commercial networks established during the crusading period provided the foundation for European mercantile empires. But European expansion also carried with it the crusading mentality that combined religious mission with territorial conquest. Spanish conquistadors in the Americas explicitly compared their activities to crusading against Muslims. Colonial administrators in Africa and Asia employed legal frameworks derived from crusading precedents. The assumption that European civilization had the right to dominate non-European peoples reflected attitudes developed during the crusading period. The banking and financial innovations created to support crusading expeditions evolved into the commercial systems that enabled European global dominance. Italian banking houses that financed holy war became the foundation for international finance capitalism. Insurance systems developed for crusading risks were adapted to enable global trade. The commercial law created for crusading enterprises provided the legal framework for European economic expansion. The university system that emerged in medieval Europe was profoundly influenced by Islamic learning acquired through crusading contact. European scholars translated Arabic texts on mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and natural science that became the foundation for later European intellectual development. The scientific revolution and enlightenment built upon knowledge originally acquired through conflict with Islamic civilization. The concept of holy war, developed during the Crusades, influenced European approaches to later conflicts with non-Christian peoples. The idea that warfare could serve religious purposes was applied to conflicts with indigenous populations in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The assumption that Christian military superiority reflected divine favor justified European colonial domination for centuries. The artistic and architectural innovations that emerged from crusading contact influenced European cultural development throughout the Renaissance and beyond. Gothic cathedral architecture incorporated elements learned from Islamic building techniques. European decorative arts adopted patterns and styles encountered in the Middle East. Musical innovations spread from Islamic to European traditions through crusading contact. The political institutions developed in the Crusader states influenced later European colonial administration. The legal frameworks created for governing multicultural populations were adapted for European colonies. The military orders provided models for later colonial administrative organizations. The diplomatic techniques developed for managing relationships with Islamic authorities influenced European approaches to non-European rulers. Women's expanded roles during the crusading period created precedents that influenced later European attitudes toward female political participation. The examples of successful female rulers in crusading territories demonstrated women's political capabilities. The commercial opportunities that enabled some women to achieve financial independence provided models for later female entrepreneurs. The religious dialogue that developed through crusading contact, despite its limitations and frequent failures, established precedents for later European engagement with non-Christian religions. The theological exchanges between Christian and Islamic scholars created intellectual frameworks that influenced later European understanding of religious diversity. But perhaps most troubling, the crusading legacy also includes the development of religious intolerance and ethnic hatred that continue to influence modern conflicts. The anti-Semitic violence that accompanied many crusading expeditions established precedents for later European persecution of Jewish communities. The assumption that religious differences justified territorial conquest provided justification for countless later conflicts. The modern Middle East bears the continuing burden of crusading memory, as Islamic societies remember the Crusades as the beginning of European aggression against Muslim lands. The State of Israel is sometimes interpreted through crusading analogies that complicate contemporary peace efforts. The language of holy war continues to influence both Islamic and Christian extremist movements. European attitudes toward Islam retain traces of crusading-era assumptions about the fundamental incompatibility between Christian and Islamic civilizations. The fear of Islamic expansion into Europe echoes medieval concerns about Muslim military threats. Contemporary debates about multiculturalism and religious diversity sometimes employ arguments that derive from crusading-era conflicts. Yet the crusading legacy also demonstrates the possibility of cultural exchange and mutual learning even in the context of religious conflict. The technological, intellectual, and artistic innovations that emerged from crusading contact prove that different civilizations can benefit from interaction despite political and religious tensions. The commercial relationships that develop between Christian and Islamic merchants show that economic cooperation can transcend religious boundaries. As you drift off to sleep tonight, consider this complex inheritance from a medieval holy war. The Crusades were simultaneously a catastrophic failure of religious leadership and a transformative encounter between civilizations. They produced both devastating violence and remarkable cultural innovation. They established precedents for both religious intolerance and cross-cultural cooperation. The fire burns low beside you. The night is peaceful around you. But the echoes of crusading conflict continue to reverberate through our modern world. Understanding this legacy, both its achievements and its tragedies, remains essential for comprehending contemporary global politics and the ongoing challenges of building peaceful relationships between different religious and cultural communities. The Crusaders who marched toward Jerusalem 8 centuries ago believed they were serving God and defending Christianity. They discovered instead that they were participants in a collision between civilizations that would reshape the world in ways they could never have imagined. Their legacy reminds us that the consequences of our actions often extend far beyond our intentions, and that the responsibility for creating a more peaceful world belongs to each generation that inherits the complex legacy of the past. Sleep well, knowing that while the age of holy war has ended, the human capacity for both conflict and cooperation that the Crusades revealed continues to shape our world. The choice between repeating ancient patterns of religious violence and building new forms of cross-cultural understanding remains ours to make.